My assessment of what we've seen on the tapes and the reports that we reviewed is that the officers followed departmental policy, which is consistent with the recommendations of both the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Commission for the Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies. They were presented with an individual who had a seizure in custody and who self-reported that he was on medication for epilepsy. They took him to a hospital. He went to the hospital and was treated by medical personnel. Those medical personnel released this man to the officers. The officers at the hospital said they thought something more was wrong with him. And after continued conference, the medical personnel themselves said to the officers, their words, not ours, we think he's faking. Based on that, the officers took him back to the prison facility. They followed our procedures and protocols. It turned out we would subsequently find from the medical examiner that he had a heart condition that killed him. The officers had no way of knowing that, and they followed our procedures in trying to get him medical assistance. I can't speak for the doctors. All I know is the following. We generally never talk about cases that are under litigation, all right? But it's so clear to us in this case that the officers followed their procedures and tried their best to get him medical assistance that I thought it was worth taking the risk to be the transparent agency in this chain of events. We are far from the only agency involved. The medical examiner's office was involved, the sheriff's office was involved, the hospital was involved, medical personnel were involved. We're the ones that are willing to talk about it because our piece of it indicates to us that our officers tried to get this man appropriate treatment. Well, our officers were told by the doctor that he'd given him medication to make him sleep. So the notion that he would lose the ability gradually to walk, that he would gradually grow less coherent and make less sense, was consistent to them what they've been told by the medical authorities, which is we've given him a medication, a sedative, to make him sleep. So they stood by with him while this took effect. So the challenge is, are police officers trained to be diagnosticians? Clearly we're not. We took him to the hospital in good faith based on his self-reported medical condition and his seizure. The hospital released him back to us saying he was okay to go back to jail. In this case, we're presented with an individual who, as you say, is gradually becoming more incoherent, but that to them was consistent with what they've been told, that he'd been given a strong sedative. The fact is, they had no way of knowing that he had heart disease. And obviously the hospital had no way of knowing or didn't know he had heart disease, and apparently nobody knew that he had heart disease. But certainly they had made a good faith effort. It's also important to keep in mind that we do almost 700 transportations a year out of our jail facility to the hospital. The officers are trained to go to the hospital, go to the emergency room that's relevant, and get that man treatment. If that which brought him to them is moderated or medicated, they're supposed to take him back. I mean, there's a federal law that says we can't emergency room shop. We go to the emergency room. They're under federal obligation to treat the condition that brought him there. They did so, and they gave him back to us. As I said, they had sought medical attention for him already. The next step in the transportation was to take him to a facility where there are medical personnel on duty 24 hours a day. We don't have nurses in our jail facility. The county sheriff office does. And so the next step in the process was to take him there. Clearly, they were in a position to make a medical evaluation of him, which they were in the process of doing when he apparently had his final fatal heart attack. So I can't speak for that, but I can say that part of the process functioned. He was taken to the next step in the process, which included an evaluation by medical personnel. Listen, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor. I know the following. We have a surviving family that lost a loved one at the age of 40 of a heart attack. That's bad. He died on our watch, so to speak. That's bad. All I'm in a position to professionally evaluate is, do the officers respond in a way consistent with their training and their policy? Did they, when they first saw a problem, get him medical assistance immediately? They did. Did they spend several hours waiting for that medical assistance? They did. When the doctors ruled that he was fit to come back to the jail, but could be expected to present himself in a groggy, less coherent way as the medication took effect, they took the doctor at his word and brought him back. The challenge then is, when they finally did get him to the jail cell, when the paperwork was all done, when they got him to the sheriff's office, additional competent medical personnel made another evaluation. It's a tragedy that he had an undiagnosed condition that no one was in a position to recognize. But all anyone knew he had was epilepsy. That was what he had been treated at the hospital for, I'm assuming. That's when we called his home that night, asked his mother to bring his epilepsy medicine. I mean, that was what he was being treated for. The fact that he had a heart attack was something that clearly no one in the chain, including police officers, recognized or responded to. Again, he's quoting what a nurse told him. I mean, I don't know what more to say to that. They've just come from the hospital where a nurse said, he's faking it. The officer repeats, he's faking it. They're wrong, obviously. Turns out he had a heart attack, although I wouldn't say that the condition he was presenting us with was necessarily a clear indication of a heart attack. He was sitting there clearly in some form of distress, acting less coherent, but in their minds, clearly he's been given a sedative. Nurse just told us he's faking it. All right, we're going to stand here with him and wait for this moment to pass so we can put him in a jail cell. I mean, it's a series of unfortunate occurrences, but certainly I don't see anything that in that conduct standing around in the hallway with that individual that indicates a willful disregard for his safety. This is the same people that just took him to the hospital and brought him back. Two of them are the same officers that said, are you sure? Could you check again? And they went and they had another conference and came back and reassured the officers. I mean, it's not like they just took the initial diagnosis at face value. They said, are you sure? Check again, we're not sure. They're not the doctors, they're police officers. And their job was to get him to the hospital, and we don't train them to disbelieve doctors. They're not trained to respond that way, but it is their common sense experience, generally speaking. I would say most of those comments come from the specific training they get in the Heimlich maneuver, which is clearly about choking. But in that context, they're generally trained not to intervene at all, because if somebody can talk and they can breathe, then you don't want to take a risk of dislodging something and making it impossible for them to breathe. The CPR training really doesn't say anything about it. So I think what you've gotten in both cases is a common sense thing that people say when they're talking to someone who is saying they can't breathe, and people generally think that if you can breathe, you can, if you can talk, that you can breathe. So it's not directly derived from their training, but it's based on their experience dealing with people and indirectly related to some of their training. As I said before, they did everything they were supposed to do. And he's faking it in this case is almost an exact quote from what they were told to the emergency room. So the challenge again is, as I say, it's not an uncommon event for us to transport prisoners to hospitals. We had 200,000 bookings in the last 5 years. A lot of people go through that facility under arrest. Many of them present some form of symptoms or other, or alleged symptoms. Our job is to try to do the best thing we can with our training as police officers, with our first aid training, to say, well, this guy just had a seizure. That definitely is kind of scary. Let's take him to the hospital. They did. And it was the hospital that said, you can have him back. We've medicated him. Here, take him back. He's faking. That's a quote. That was in the report. And they brought him back and basically said the same thing they'd been told. They sat him in a hallway so he wouldn't injure himself. They sat him down so he wouldn't have another seizure. Well, they can't prevent the seizure, but obviously he wouldn't fall out in that context. They were trying to get him to maintain a little bit. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that he had undiagnosed heart disease that killed him. But the officers only had the evidence of their eyes and the experience they had at the emergency room that they took him to, that they asked for a second look. They did what they thought was appropriate, and it certainly was consistent with the procedures that they were operating under. Listen, I can't speak for what was going on inside everybody's mind at that moment or what they were thinking. We hire people for the best of reasons who come to try to work hard on the public's behalf and do the right thing. I've got no doubt that the people who work for the sheriff's office come to these professions to try to do good, not harm, and take care of the most disadvantaged, most troublesome problem society presents anybody. And in the middle of the night, all you've got is cops and sheriffs and nurses working, shifts in jail cells. That's all you've got. The rest of the system's taken a walk. I don't know what was on their minds. I'm not assuming there was any bad intent on their minds based on everything they'd done up till then. Do I wish that somebody perhaps had done CPR sooner? Sure, but I don't know if they saw him as in need of CPR. I don't have any reason to believe that anybody in that room, not the nurses, not the deputies, not the officers, wished this man ill. He was laying on the floor. Perhaps they thought he was sleeping. I don't know what was in their mind. I know it looks terrible. Sadly, these are not uncommon events in central booking processes and procedures. People get sick. People lie on the floor. I don't know what they thought, but I have no reason to believe they wished this man ill. Well, I don't know. I do know that we know in this case they did. He had a seizure. My understanding is he had an additional seizure in the hospital. They were worried for his health. Apparently, competent medical authority believed that these would pass and that their medication would sedate him sufficiently to prevent future seizures. No one was operating with the assumption that he had advanced heart disease that could kill him with a blood clot. Nobody knew that. So they released him back to us, and you saw the rest. Well, certainly we've constituted a new critical incident review board to take a look at this one, as we have looked at other incidents recently, to deconstruct it to see if there is. Here's the challenge for us. I'd like to be able to say, yes, of course, I know exactly what we should have done differently. I don't offhand, all right? He presented himself not inconsistent with the medication he had been given, and he died of something unrelated to the reason we took him to the hospital. Took him to the hospital because he'd had a seizure, and he was a self-diagnosed epileptic. He died of something completely unrelated. I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm going to have to defer to our academy staff and outside personnel to take a closer look at that and say if they can identify a point where we would have been within the right bounds to say we need to go to another hospital. Because as I said, federal law pretty much governs this notion that we don't get to emergency room shop. If we take you to a place for your epileptic seizure and they treat your seizure and they send you back to us, we're not diagnosticians. And in this case, he didn't die of epilepsy. He died of something totally unrelated that nobody spotted. The most important thing I want everybody to know is that we are very concerned every single time somebody dies in our custody. And if there's anything we know that we could have done differently that could have prevented it, we need to look at it and change the policies and procedures in a way that would make that event less likely. It's one thing if somebody says they can't breathe and we didn't believe them and a tragedy ensued. Well, the easy fix just is, okay, we're just going to get an ambulance from now on. This is a harder one, all right? The condition that he had initially, we got treatment for. He died of something unrelated that no one in the system spotted. This is going to be a harder one for me to see what policy change would have made a difference.